Just
Excellent. Okay, good. Well, so I'll tell you briefly who I am, and also the sponsoring group is the Friends of Sheri Capehart Nature Preserve, which is in Southwest Arlington. And if you haven't been there, it's a wonderful place, wonderful little patch of eastern crosstimbers habitat with a lot of cool stuff to see. Um, so, without further ado, we should jump in and talk about amphibians a little bit. Um, Let me get the presentation up. Okay. I apologize. We need to let me find the first slide. We don't want to start there. Let's try there. Okay. So you should be seeing the wild lives of Texas reptiles and amphibians. And so today we'll talk about amphibians. And as this is a review for some of you, you know some or all of this part. So amphibians are vertebrates. Most of them have a life history that starts in the water and later on land. So they are taxonomically, they are class amphibia from the words amphi, both, in other words, both, and bios, life. So two kinds of life, the aquatic part of their lives and the terrestrial part of their lives. And there are exceptions, of course, to that, and we'll talk about a little bit of that. But very often it's, frogs that live on land, but then they breed and the eggs hatch into tadpoles in the water. So there's kind of that two stages of life. Within amphibians, there are three orders. One of them is called Caudata, and that's the salamanders, the big group that includes all the salamanders. One is the order Anura, which includes all the frogs and toads. And then one is the order Gymnophiona, which is Sicilians. And I'm not talking about those tonight because those are tropical legless amphibians, almost a little bit eel-like, I guess you might say. And they are not found in the U.S. at all. So that's not part of our discussion tonight. Many amphibians are more cold tolerant than many reptiles. Um, and as a result of that, when you think about the salamanders, winter is a major breeding season for many of those guys. Winter's really the best time to see salamanders. So next, now we got a ways to wait, don't we? It's not that you can't see them any other time, but they really avoid the heat and they are most active in the winter, both because of cooler temperatures and because of greater rainfall, at least theoretically. Um, so let's talk about amphibian skin for a moment. That's one of the things that's kind of particular to amphibians. They're not dry and scaly. It's not very tough. It's actually fairly delicate skin. Water and gases can pass easily through that skin. So that makes them vulnerable to drying out. Any of you who have kept frogs or toads in captivity, you know you need to keep them in a moist substrate because they will dry out and die if they're kept too dry. Um, so many of them live in close association with water or at least humid microhabitats. So, you might find a Gulf Coast toad in a relatively dry area, but under a log where it's moist and they come out at night and that kind of stuff. That skin can absorb oxygen. In fact, some species get most of their oxygen that way. There are a few salamanders that don't have lungs even, and they get all their oxygen that way. Um, the skin produces mucus to help keep it moist, help keep it from drying out, and of course that also makes them slippery or slimy. And there's a benefit there because it helps them be able to escape better. Again, if you've caught frogs, you know how that works. You grab them and they're slippery and they get away from you. Um, and the skin also produces toxins which may be irritating. If you've ever seen a dog pick up a toad and then begin sort of foaming at the mouth and working their mouths like, "Oh my gosh, this was terrible. I shouldn't have done that." That's because the skin secretions are irritating. A few species secrete pretty potent poisons, and let's look at that for a moment. Um, at first, we're going to talk about a genus of newts, the genus Tarica, which is not found around here. But that genus of newts, the rough-skinned newts, they secrete uh, tetrodotoxin, which is a really potent neurotoxin. In fact, there are a few fatalities recorded. Most people, of course, use good judgment and they don't eat rough-skinned newts, but at least one of those fatalities from somebody swallowing a newt, maybe on a dare, I don't know, but it's just one of those things you don't want to do. And around here, you could swallow a salamander and it would be gross and it's something you wouldn't want to do and you might get sick, but you're not going to die. But in Oregon and Washington, it's possible that you could die from that. So it's Pacific Coast. Now we have some newts in the same family in the genus Nautophthalmus that also produce some amount of it, and I haven't been able to chase down how much, but clearly not the same amount. These Our local newts are not something to be worried about, be afraid of. Also, it needs to get into the digestive system or into the bloodstream. So even out in California or Oregon, if you picked up a rough skin newt and you washed your hands later, you'd probably be okay. Some of it might get through your skin. You might feel kind of weird, but you should be okay. But if you ate it or if it got in your bloodstream, that would be serious. I mention it in part because there's a really interesting story of a kind of evolutionary arms race between newts and the local garter snakes out there. So some of the garter snakes can eat those newts, and they get a little funky for a while. They get a little stiff and not moving around quite as well, but then they do fine. So they can eat the newts, and so for evolutionary purposes, what does a newt want to do? It wants to develop even stronger toxin, right? So some of them do. Some of them evolve greater toxicity, which might tend to protect the newts. But then the garter snakes, the ones that are a bit more resistant, they make it through. Their babies uh, pass those genes along. So now you have more resistant garter snakes. And so they can eat the new newts, the more toxic newts. And so that having happened, the newts now have to evolve even greater toxicity. So it's kind of an escalating arms race, isn't it? Um, so it's an interesting story. Plus, I love garter snakes, so I like to tell that story. Um, there are only some species of garter snakes that can eat them, and they're due to differences in some of the muscle function and all. And they sequester the toxin in the liver. So then you have a poisonous garter snake, which is weird. We talk about, some of our snakes are venomous, but they're not poisonous because they bite you, you don't bite them. But anything that did bite one of those garter snakes, a predator of some kind or another that would eat that garter snake, yeah, it'd be poisonous. Okay, anyway, we don't have that, except that we have eastern newts that are not as poisonous, but and have some of that same toxin. Um, One other note about amphibian skin is the potential for human medicine. The skin secretes proteins with an antimicrobial, an antibacterial, antioxidant, and repair and renewal activity. So that could make them pretty useful to us, right? A 2011 study found that the waxy monkey frog, which is not a local frog at all, but those monkey frog skin secretions could inhibit angiogenesis, Now, angiogenesis is simply the growth of blood vessels. Well, if it inhibits them, if it slows them down, if it makes it where you don't grow new blood vessels, that could be potentially useful in slowing tumor growth, couldn't it? So one of the things that's at least being looked at is the potential for those skin secretions to help develop new medicines that way. And also, the study found that a protein from the giant fire-bellied toad, again, not at all from around here, um, could switch on angiogenesis. So if that could make blood vessels grow better, that could be potentially helpful in wound repair. So, in other words, there's some potential for medicines coming out of amphibian skin. Okay, let's talk about the structure of some of the frogs. A kind of a typical frog. The one that you're looking at is a is a green frog, formerly called the bronze frog. The bronze frog was a subspecies that's no longer recognized. Um, so anyway, the green frog, Lithobates clamitans, that I photographed down in the Big Thicket in Hardin County. That frog here has, as you can see, a dorsolateral ridge that's a kind of a glandular fold of skin that really produces the skin toxins a lot. So a lot of frogs you'll see dorsolateral ridges, dorsolateral folds down the back, and that's it's very glandular kind of tissue. The other thing you'll notice is the tympanum or the eardrum just behind the eye. That round disc there is the eardrum. So they can hear. Frogs and toads, their hearing is kind of attuned to the calls of males uh, during breeding. So they're particularly sensitive to their own calls, but they can hear some other things too. There's those eyes popping up above the head, and if you've ever seen one swallow, you know that if it, grabs a bug and is swallowing it, the eyes pop down into the head and actually tend to push the food further into the gullet. So that's a weird little factoid about the eyes. And as with many frogs, the back legs are long and has really strongly webbed back feet. So they can jump a long way, they can swim great in the water. That's what a lot of our typical frogs, that's the way they're put together. Um, Now let's look at toads and how they're different a little bit. Remember, toads and frogs are both in the order Anura, so they're related, but also different. So this is a Woodhouse's toad. You notice that it has eyes that kind of pop up over the head, like with the other frog. They pop down, they pull down to push prey down, just like in the frog. They have a tympanum, just like the frog. But now we've got all these warty glands over the back. And the big one behind the eye is called a parotoid gland. And the parotoid gland is just a big toxin factory. And so we were talking about if a dog picks up a toad and is all foamy and drops it and all that, those things are actually able to squeeze out a sort of a milky toxin in pretty good quantities when they're really under attack. You and I won't usually see that. If we pick up a toad, we're not going to see that, but under some circumstances, they can really release a lot of toxin. And it's yucky. It's not going to kill the dog. It's not going to kill us, but it's very yucky. Um, the other thing you see in the photo is these cranial crests. We're going to talk about them in just a minute. It's a little harder to see in the Woodhouse's toad, but what you see are two L-shaped bony ridges, and we'll look at that's probably something in the chat. We'll look at that in a minute. Those One of the things about those is that they become really helpful in identifying which toad you're looking at. And of course, the shorter back legs for hopping. So I started to say, how many of you have caught toads? And I do that because it's like I'm used to talking to live people, and you can raise your hand at home and I won't see you. But if you have, you notice that toads can hop away. They get away from us pretty quick, right? They may not be able to hop very far, but they just sort of hop, 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 one after another, and they can travel pretty fast. So that's kind of a typical toad and how they're put together. The one other thing that I may be further in, but I want to mention, I want to make sure I don't forget. If we flip that toad over, on the underside, kind of between the back legs, the skin on its belly, but again toward the back legs, is called a seat patch, and that's where it drinks. That skin has really got a lot of capillaries in it, and remember, water can pass through the skin fairly easily, and so the toad isn't going to go up to a water dish and lap water out of it. What it's going to do is it's going to sit in water or sit in a really damp place and absorb fluids through the skin. All right, let's look at the next one. Let's look at those cranial crests and parotoid glands again. Um, some of you might have the Peterson Field Guide to Reptiles and Amphibians of Eastern and Central North America. This is taken from that. And I think the same diagram may be in that Frogs and Toads of North America book that I showed you. Anyway, you can see the shapes of some of these. Look down at the lower right at the Gulf Coast toad. That one has really very pronounced cranial crests, those things that look like a bony network of shapes. It's real obvious on the toad. There's and So that can help you verify, yeah, for sure that's a Gulf Coast toad. Whereas look at Fowler's toad up in the upper left. Fowler's is very closely related to Woodhouse's toad. So our two local toads, Gulf Coast toad and Woodhouse's toad. The Woodhouse's is going to have those L-shaped crests like Fowler's toads, and the parotoid glands are going to be shaped like in that drawing. Whereas the Gulf Coast toad, they're a little bit triangular shaped, aren't they? So, um, so that's the deal about parotoid glands and cranial crests. Um, let's look at reproduction for a second. That's where we get into frog calls in particular. Males have an advertising call, which is where you get, well, stereotypically, ribbit, right? None of our frogs and toads sound like ribbit, but you get trills and calls of various kinds on spring and summer nights from frogs. Those are advertising calls from males saying to the females, here I am, I'm available to you. And so the females that are ready for breeding will, this happens around ponds and slow moving bodies of water, because breeding typically is going to happen in the water, and the female will lay eggs in the water. Uh, Different species have distinctive calls. So just like with birds, those of you who are good birders would listen to a northern cardinal, and you would listen to a white-eyed vireo, and you would know the one is a cardinal and the other is a vireo just by the call, right? You can do that with frogs too, and sometimes it's real obvious and easy. Sometimes it's a little harder. But we're going to listen to some calls in a minute, but they each have distinctive calls. So when a female approaches, the male mounts and holds on in a position kind of like being piggyback. It's called amplexus. He's basically riding along with his forelegs wrapped just under her forelegs. There's, I think, at least one species where they wrap around the female frog's waist, but usually amplexus is with the forelegs just under the female's forelegs. And then so she lays eggs, and the male deposits sperm as that happens. So the eggs are fertilized externally as the female lays them in the water. Um, so the number of eggs varies, maybe in the hundreds. Rarely it can be in the thousands. I mean, we're talking about some serious breeding activity here, right? Obviously, not all of those are going to survive, but females often lay huge numbers of eggs. All right, here's an example. Um, what you're seeing here are newly hatched tadpoles on an egg mass that's now empty. So if you look at that cluster of eggs, and that's all underwater. The water's clear, but it's underwater. So the eggs are now empty, and you have these little black tadpoles that will grow and kind of change color as they get ready to develop. Because this is in Presidio County, I think it's highly likely that these were canyon tree frogs, and they will grow up to be adult frogs that breathe air and live on land. Let me just glance at this. So one of the comments was, while we're at it, that salamanders were cold-blooded, and they are. Um, so let's see. Uh, so yes, salamanders, and that may have been when I was talking about uh, some of the amphibians are more cold tolerant. And what that so not only are they cold-blooded, reptiles and amphibians both are cold-blooded. All that really means is that they rely on where they are for warmth. So um, if a salamander is under wet leaves in the winter, it won't be and the temperature shouldn't be below freezing. If it's getting that cold, they'll seek something deeper to protect from freezing. But it could be like in the 40s, and the salamander itself would be that the temperature would be in the 40s because its temperature is going to be the same as its surroundings. That's what it is. So really, the term cold-blooded only means the temperature is going to be like its surroundings. Um, and we'll talk later on when we're talking about reptiles. We're talking about some lizards that might bask in the sunlight, and it's like 100 plus on the rock, and the lizard's temperature may be 100 degrees. So in that case, the lizard's pretty hot-blooded, but all it really means by cold-blooded is they don't generate their own body heat. Um, okay, so let's back to this egg mass and the breeding thing. Let's see. Here we go. So as they develop, you're going to be drawn to that crayfish, right? I know my eyes kind of go to the crayfish. Ignore the crayfish. That's actually not part of what we're looking at. Although maybe it's a hungry crayfish, right? And it's thinking, in just a minute, I'm going to go visit that tadpole. So the point of the photo is the tadpole. This is a leopard frog tadpole that has developed a ways. It's not like one of those little itty bitty black ones. It's getting closer to being a frog. And it looks like a comma, right? It's a little sort of oval body and a tail drifting down below it. Tadpoles are vegetarian. These guys will kind of scrape along stuff that grows on rocks or maybe decaying plants or algae and that kind of stuff. They eat plant matter. And here is a leopard frog metamorph. And what I mean by metamorph is this frog is almost an adult frog. It's still got a tail, right? You see that tail sticking out there, but it's got big back legs. Those are really growing and getting big. It's even got front legs now. They start with just back legs, and then later on the front legs appear. And all the changes that have to happen, the frog is going to go from being vegetarian to being carnivorous because the adults are all carnivorous. Also, they have to go from gill breathing to having lungs and air breathing. You can see that frog. You can kind of make out where the mouth is, right? Uh, and um and it's pretty close to being. At some point, those things will start gulping air. They're still in the water, but they'll come up and gulp air. Um, so this is kind of a in-between stage, right? And it's almost an adult. Okay, let's look at the structure of a typical salamander, or at least one of the typical salamanders. So this one is a smallmouth salamander. This is the one in Tarrant County, well, really in Tarrant and Dallas County, that we're more likely to see. We don't see very many salamanders right here in DFW, but the smallmouth salamander, and there's not many of those left. There used to be, not that uncommon, but like a lot of things, they've really declined. I haven't been out to the drying beds near the Trinity to check this out, but I hear that you can still find them there, which is really cool, and I'd like to go check that out. This particular one was seen at the Old Sabine Bottoms Wildlife Management Area, which is kind of northwest of Tyler. Okay, so here's the how salamanders are put together. You see the eyes protrude above the head. So if you were looking at this and saying, why is this not a lizard? One of the things you would say is, whoop, the eyes are stuck on top of the head and they kind of stick up. That's not lizard-like at all. You would also see that there's no eardrum, and also there's no middle ear cavity. But salamanders actually do have inner ear structures. They have a little bit of hearing, but not much. Hearing's not very important to them. Most lizards have eardrums and hear, much better than that. Uh, Along the back, you see those costal grooves? It looks like the salamander has been folded too long and has got creases. Those costal grooves are helpful in wicking water up to keep the skin moist. Um, and moist skin is one of the differences between a salamander and a lizard, because a lizard is, of course, going to have scaly, dry skin, and salamanders are going to feel kind of rubbery, maybe a little bit slimy, but the skin definitely needs to not dry out. Also, look at the feet. There's no claws on those digits. A lizard would have claws. Salamanders don't have claws on those digits. No fingers, no toes have claws. And look at the tail. Most of our salamanders, at any rate, have vertically compressed tails like an oar. So lizards have kind of round tails. These guys have an oar-shaped tails. A lot of them do. Not every one, but a lot of them do. Okay, uh, let's talk about salamander reproduction. Um, this this is weird. I mean, this is kind of nerdy, right? But it's weird because amphibians, have basically have external fertilization of eggs, right? But here it gets kind of in between. First of all, it mentions at the top that breeding and egg laying occur in the fall, winter, or early spring, almost always, and very often after rains. So the male, first of all, I don't have on here, but the male actually does some courtship. Most species, you get some courtship where the male is sort of dancing around the female, and he'll do these weird leg lifts and twisting around with his body and move up along her body and go under her chin. And at any rate, at some point, he deposits something called a spermatophore. And a spermatophore is a little kind of packet of sperm that he would deposit like on the ground, or, but then during all that courtship stuff, all that dancing around, he will help her. All of that helps the female position herself over that spermatophore. And she picks it up with her cloaca. Now, the cloaca wasn't in that photo of a typical salamander, right? But a lot of you know that a cloaca is for reptiles, amphibians, birds, a kind of general purpose opening to the body. So a cloaca is where waste comes out. It is also where eggs are laid or babies happen, and it's also where reproduction happens. So the cloaca opens into, the intestine, but also part of it can open into the reproductive structures and all of that. So she picks up the spermatophore with her cloaca, and so the fertilization is internal, but there's no copulation. Um, Females may lay eggs in the water. There's some species that lay eggs in damp material at the margins. There's one I'll tell you about, lays eggs in damp material near ponds that are not yet full, and they wait for the rains to fill the pond up. And when the pond fills up, it covers the eggs, and then the eggs then hatch later. Now, there's a few species where young fully develop inside the eggs and hatch as miniature adults. So it's like, yeah, there's an exception to everything, isn't there? Um, the one I mentioned, I think the closest one I'm aware of, is the slimy salamander, which I have caught in Georgetown in central Texas along the San Jacinto River. You see slimy salamanders. Those guys will lay eggs in damp material, um, and then the eggs simply develop into full-grown adult, not full-grown, miniature adults and hatch, and they don't have to start in the water. Okay, uh, let's get some examples of some of this. Here, these are smallmouth salamander eggs. So what you're looking at is a kind of a stick in the water with jelly-like string of eggs along it. So there's a bubble at the left, and each of those little jelly-like things is an egg with a little white thing in the middle of it. And those are smallmouth salamander eggs. This is a smallmouth salamander larvae. The eggs hatch into these little larvae with the little frilly gills. Otherwise, they're kind of like a tadpole. Um, and these are larvae of the spotted salamander. Um, several of these photos are courtesy of Carl Franklin. I want to make sure to give him credit. This one is courtesy of Andrew Brinker, and I appreciate that as well. These larvae are a good bit further along toward being adults. They look almost like the adults with the dark spotted pattern. They still have the gills, but they got pretty well developed legs, and they're nearly adults. But anyway, but those are larvae. Um, okay, I've thrown this in here. I want you to be aware of the book that for most purposes, for most of you, if you wanted a field guide, and I'm kind of old-fashioned, right? Books, field guides, oh my gosh. iNat is wonderful and I use it a lot, but field guides are also wonderful and they have a different purpose. And if you wanted a field guide for Texas amphibians all over the state, this is a really good one. So it'll have pictures, it'll have text that it includes how to identify them and some about their natural history as well. So it's a really good field guide. Okay, so going by families, here are the amphibians of north central Texas. There's the mole salamanders, and that's like the smallmouth that we looked at earlier. Also like the spotted that we just saw the larvae of. Those are mole salamanders. They're kind of bigger. Lungless salamanders, plethodontids, are like the dwarf salamander, which we'll have a look at in a minute. Also, that slimy was a lungless. And then there's a family for what are called mud puppies. And the one that we have in East Texas is called the Gulf Coast water dog. Another family is the newts. We talked about newts earlier with all that toxic skin secretion stuff, right? We have the eastern newt. We'll talk about him in a minute. And then another family, or two families really, one's for amphiumas, one's for sirens. Those are kind of eel-like. They are aquatic all their lives, and they may have either four or two, depending on which one we're talking about, little vestigial legs, but they're not really useful. They really kind of look like eels. And then there's a family for what's called the true toads, like Woodhouse's toad. There's a family for what's called spadefoots, and those are very toad-like. There's some differences, and I'll show you in a minute. One of which is that these have a spade-like projection on the back feet, and they're really good at digging, and they live in places where they often have to dig down into shelter and shelter from drying and heat. Then there's a family for the tree frogs, but the tree frogs also, that family includes cricket frogs, chorus frogs, as well as tree frogs. And then there's a family for chirping frogs, the Rio Grande chirping frog, and narrow-mouthed toads that we'll talk about, and true frogs like the leopard frogs and bullfrogs. So those are all the amphibians of north central Texas. I've got photos of several of them. We'll start with the smallmouth salamander. You've already seen a photo of this guy. They're very dark like that with this sort of gray or silvery blotchy pattern. And then this is a marbled salamander. I took this photo at White Oak Creek Wildlife Management Area near Texarkana. The best places for some of these guys is in bottomland habitats. And this is a bottomland habitat where we found two or three of these marbled salamanders. They look like this with these sort of silvery crossbars. This is the one that lays eggs uh, in late autumn at the margin of a pond that hasn't filled up yet. And then they wait for rains, and the female stays with those eggs. And then when the pond fills up with rain, um, then the water and the eggs are underwater, then they hatch, and mom's pretty much done at that point. Let me look at something here. Uh, yeah, the drying beds. Well, we'll have to talk. Permanently closed? I thought it was a pending further notice, but at any rate, we'll have to talk about that. Okay. Oh, and Kanina's got Rio Grande chirping frogs. Cool. Um, okay. Yeah, yeah, hatching straight from eggs. Okay. Um, back to our pictures here. Um, this is this is an eastern newt. This is a really complicated uh, pattern. Let me get this out of my way. Uh, they have a really complicated development. So what you're looking at is a photo of a terrestrial adult of these guys. So here's how it's like they can't decide what they want to do, right? So the eggs are laid in water, and the eggs hatch, and some of the larvae develop and just stay as aquatic gilled larvae, breathing through gills, and that's the rest of their life. They're going to be an adult living in water. Some of them do that, but most of them remain as, uh, I'm sorry, lose those gills and emerge onto land as a terrestrial red eft. Um, and often that color is red, or at least kind of reddish, maroon, whatever. That appears to be a kind of a warning color because you remember we talked about those toxic skin secretions, right? The eft stage has a 10 times greater amount of that toxin. And so the red color might warn predators, hey, don't try and eat me because you'll get really sick or die. Um, so anyway, lots of them become these terrestrial red Fs, but then after a period of time, they return, most of them return to the water and become aquatic adults, but they're aquatic adults with lungs. So they still breathe air, but they live in the water and have to come up for air all the time. But some of them stay on land as terrestrial adults, like the one you see in the photo here. And this particular one I saw at the old Sabine Bottoms Wildlife Management Area. Sabine River bottomlands, kind of near Tyler. Um, okay, uh, this is the dwarf salamander. I apologize for this photo. I need to go back to the big thicket and get a better photo, don't I? But you can see that these are literally very small salamanders, right? It's one of that lungless family, and they're found in parts of East Texas. I didn't include anything that does get at least within a county or so of us. So these get into East Texas pretty close to us, but where I've really seen them is in the big thicket. So I need to go back. All right. So much about salamanders, newts, all of that. If there's This would be a time where if you have a specific salamander question, we can do that, and then we'll talk about frogs. Um, okay, let's talk about frogs some, and we'll come back to any questions that you have. We're starting in no particular order with the narrowmouth toads. The one on the left is the western or Great Plains narrowmouth toad, which is what we would find around here. The eastern narrowmouth toad is found a bit east of here, and you can see that they're closely related, right? These are small frogs in a family called Microhylidae. They have little narrow heads. It looks like, little pointy heads, and they have a fold of skin behind the eyes on each of them. You can see there's a little fold of skin, and uh, let's see. I heard it. I heard something. Uh, I was going to see if Erica was here because of her interest in tarantulas. Um, she would know this, and some of you may know this, that narrow-mouthed toads sometimes live in a mutualistic relationship with tarantulas in the burrow. Boy, that sounds as creepy as heck to me. Like, that's where I want to make my home? No. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with tarantulas. Um, here's the way that works. In a mutualistic relationship, both of them are going to benefit, right? So the tarantula gets the benefit of these little guys hopping around and eating little bugs, particularly ants, that might interfere with the tarantula, in particular damage the tarantula's eggs. So that's the benefit the tarantula gets. And I guess the benefit that the narrow-mouthed toad gets is pretty obvious, right? Ain't nobody messing with the narrow-mouthed toad in that burrow as long as the tarantula's home. So apparently the frog gets some protection and the tarantula gets some relief from ants. The calls of these things are amazing, y'all. So I want you to listen to what the Great Plains narrow-mouthed toad sounds like. And it's not too late if you get out on the see these are tend to be grassland prairie animals. You get out somewhere that's got enough grasslands or patches of prairie and see if you hear these after a rain in ditches or small ponds. They may be breeding. And here's what they sound like.
Great Plains narrow-mouthed toad, Gastrophrine olivacea.
Okay. Um, so it's that was a chorus of about three of them. It's that very high-pitched insect-like drone, and it's really loud if you're close to one at night on the prairie. It's louder than you would think it would be. The eastern narrow-mouthed toad sounds kind of similar, pretty close.
The narrow-mouthed toads. Number 32, the eastern narrow-mouthed toad, Gastrophrine carolinensis.
Man, so that's pretty
The
interesting.
narrow-mouthed toads.
Oh heck, come here. There we go. Um, that's pretty interesting. If you're out there on the prairie at night listening to those things, you'd think you got a mosquito really mad, and it's buzzing around your ear. Here's another prairie frog. Actually, this is a small frog. It's a big photo, but it's a small frog. The spotted chorus frog. This one I photographed out in the Fort Worth Prairie, west of Benbrook, toward Weatherford. Um, so in the prairie areas out there, after rains, you get these temporary pools, and the frogs, these chorus frogs, come out and set up quite the racket and breed, and then the tadpoles have to develop into adults pretty quickly because that pool will dry up, right? And if they haven't developed by then, they won't survive. Here's what spotted chorus frogs sound like. Whoops. Nope. Let me try that again. Here we go.
Spotted chorus frog, Pseudacris clarkii.
That may or may not come through in stereo, but that's really something in stereo when you got more than one calling. But it's a little bit could be described as running your thumb across a comb, right? Just wort, wort, wort over and over again. That's what these spotted chorus frogs sound like. Here is another prairie grasslands animal, the Strecker's chorus frog. I have found these not too uncommonly at LBJ Grasslands. And they sound like kind of like a squeaky wheel. Here's what they sound like.
Strecker's chorus frog, Pseudacris streckeri.
So that's more than one, but it's basically just kind of this cheap, like a squeaky wheel. You notice that this one has got all these nice stripes and patterns on it. Depending on the temperature and the frog's mood, that may fade or it may be brighter. But one of the ways to identify these guys, if you're out there, you see the pattern on the back, but also particularly that dark mask on the face that goes from the nostril and through the eye and back to the foreleg. That little black mask is really typical for Strecker's chorus frog. And again, this is a frog that you're not going to find at our local ponds right here in town. It's probably further out west. Um, and during the summer, they kind of have to dig in. Like we don't know a whole lot about their lifestyle, these and some of the other chorus frogs, because they have to be dug in and we don't even see them for a good bit of the year, but they're out in the spring breeding. Okay, everybody, I bet you, has seen these guys. And they're in the same family, but of course, much, much more common. This is Blanchard's cricket frog. And there's two photos here, and what I'm illustrating is the one on the left is LBJ grasslands area, caliche kind of soil. I mean, a lot of it's sandy, I know, but lighter soil, some of which is kind of clay or whatever. And the color of the frogs is generally lighter. And the one on the right was photographed in the big thicket in forest habitat where there's all those decaying leaves and the soil is much darker. So these populations of these frogs wind up kind of mimicking the substrate, so they're much better concealed. And they can have little patches of other color. The one on the left has got a rusty patch. Sometimes they have green. The one on the right has this green algae looking patch, but sometimes it's another color. But they do have these other little colors that break up the pattern. And the thing that will help you decide that this is a cricket frog and not some kind of a chorus frog or something else is the little backwards pointing triangle on the head. So look at these. The one on the right's easiest to see. But if you look between the eyes, there's a little triangle and the point points backwards. And cricket frogs, that's kind of an identifying mark that will help you see for sure uh, if it's a cricket frog. So I bet you've all heard the call. Let's give it a listen.
Northern cricket frog, Acris crepitans.
Okay, first I'm gonna interrupt. Names are a mess, and if you get me started, I'll like bore you with a discussion of of names. I'm cranky about names, because it's Northern cricket frog. Is it the Eastern cricket frog? Is it the Blanchard's cricket frog? Oh my goodness! So it's Acris crepitans. The subspecies that most people recognize as Blanchardii, here, that is, in our area. But if you don't recognize it, you use a different name for it. So INAT's going to call it a Blanchard's cricket frog. Some other places and some field guides will either call it an Eastern cricket frog or in this case, which I think this name is obsolete now, Northern cricket frog. Anyway, this is what they sound like. Let me get back to this. Okay, so that is the deal with those guys. It's like two stones being knocked together, right? We were out at Sheri Capehart just a few weeks ago doing some frog call monitoring with a group, and we heard lots and lots of those guys. And anybody that was with us on that walk knows when you're really close to them, they're surprisingly loud. This little frog could sit on your thumbnail, and yet they're really loud. So that was a really cool night. Okay, here's one of my favorites. Well, they're all my favorites, but whatever. This is the green tree frog. This is our loveliest tree frog, I feel like. Um, they are plain green like that, although they can get darkened depending on temperature and mood. They all have this white stripe along the jaw and down the side and also along the legs. And a lot of them have these little tiny kind of golden or yellowish flecks in the skin that you'll see sometimes. Anyway, here's what these are, there are places in Tarrant County that they're common and there are places where you simply won't find them. But here's what they sound like on a spring night if you do find them. And Fort Worth Nature Center is a wonderful place to hear this. I just lost my place here.
Green tree frog, Hyla cinerea.
Behind this, you're hearing some other frogs, by the way. The one that sounds a little bit like a pig. I think where they recorded this, there were also some pig frogs calling, and they literally do kind of sound like pigs. So in these, you sometimes hear something else. But obviously, these are the ones with that big honking, like geese or ducks, uh, and a big chorus of them is just honking all over the place, and it's almost overwhelming and it's wonderful. I mean, I love it. For some people, it might literally be overwhelming because it's pretty loud. But that's the green tree frog. You can see from the toe pads here, these are literally tree frogs that can adhere to stuff. People in East Texas find them stuck to their windows sometimes at the Nature Center. Sometimes you find them stuck to the giant reeds or leaves where they're resting during the day. They can adhere to stuff. All right, here's the gray tree frog, also with the big toe pads. So again, they can adhere to stuff. Now there's 3 photos here, and it's not like there are 3 species or whatever. The one on the lower right um, is on the top is plain green. It's a young frog as well, but gray tree frogs can get this color. And if you see one that looks plain green, but if you look on the sides and it's got that all that gray stuff, it's a gray tree frog. The one in the upper right is kind of intermediate, right? It's got a lot of green on him. It looks like lichen, doesn't it? And then over on the left is just plain gray with these different shades of gray. It's a really pretty frog, I think. Now, the interesting thing about these frogs is that uh, there's 2 kinds, and you basically can't tell them apart just by looking at them. They all are going to have this either gray or green color. They have, if you notice, just under the eye, there's a patch of either light or green color. And they all look like this, except that versicolor, Hyla versicolor, which is I can't remember what they're calling it now, but basically just the gray tree frog, has 4 sets of chromosomes in every cell. So its cells are bigger and lumpier, and sometimes the frog even looks a little bit that way. And that's very weird, but it has 4 sets of chromosomes, where most animals are diploid, right? So the other one, Hyla chrysosceles, the Cope's gray tree frog, has 2 sets of chromosomes, like most of us, and so you can tell them apart genetically, but you pretty much have to take them to the lab. But you can also kind of tell them apart by their song. So listen to this call. Listen first to Hyla versicolor.
Gray tree frog, Hyla versicolor.
So it's that sort of fluttering, almost bird-like call, right? It's slower and kind of musical compared to this guy. Let's listen to Cope's gray tree frog.
Cope's gray tree frog, Hyla chrysosceles.
So if you were to go up to LBJ grasslands right now, chances are pretty good around the ponds. You might hear a bunch of Cope's gray tree frogs, and they're going to sound like that. It's going to be less musical and a little quicker. The other thing that makes it complicated with these guys is that it's going to vary a little bit with temperature. So on warmer nights it'll go faster. On cooler nights they trill slower, but it's going to be basically similar. And this one on the left is going to sound more musical and bird-like, and the one on the right is more raspy. Okay, the Rio Grande chirping frog. These guys in their natural range, they get up to like Cameron County in the lower Rio Grande Valley. So they get up around Brownsville or so, and that's about it. But in all the horticulture industry down there, all those potted plants get brought up to other parts of Texas and they've been introduced. So really, this is a non-native frog in our part of Texas. They, as far as I know, don't seem to be doing any harm, but they're not native here and they've been brought up from the lower Rio Grande Valley. Um, the way to tell that this is not a cricket frog, because the size is pretty similar, they're sort of flatter, and you see that they're kind of this greenish spotted kind of quality. You notice that, well, if you look at a lot of these frogs, you'll see the eyes are a little further set apart in the chirping frog. And there's no little triangle between the eyes like you would see in a cricket frog. So this is the Rio Grande chirping frog, and man, chirping is right. This is what they do.
Rio Grande chirping frog. Eleutherodactylus cystignathoides.
All right, so that's what they sound like. You notice it's kind of irregular, right? It's not a regular chip, chip, chip. It's not regularly spaced. It's kind of all over the place. Um, And if some of you have heard it in your gardens or in other places around town where there's moist soil, it could be that you're hearing Rio Grande chirping frogs. Remember, this is the one that breeds and basically females lay eggs in damp material. Those eggs develop straight into adult frogs. There's no tadpoles, so they don't have to be in a pond. All they need is damp material like damp earth or leaves. Pretty cool little frog. Okay, the leopard frogs are pretty common. This one may be a Rio Grande leopard frog, and I'm, because of time, going to just skip right over to the others. Rio Grande leopard frog is mostly central Texas. It comes up to the DFW area, so there's sort of three species that meet, and some of them might be Rio Grande leopard frogs. And some of them might be hybrids even a little bit. Okay, here's the commoner ones. Both these frogs actually came from LBJ grasslands, so they can occur in the same area. The plains leopard frog has usually a spot on the snout. You see that spot there, and quite often the others don't. So, and you'd think those spots are just random all over the place. So how could that be a distinguishing feature? But it does seem to be that way, that the plains has a spot on the snout. The other thing is, you see those dorsolateral ridges that we talked about, that glandular tissue, the white line down the back. It's broken and inset toward the back for the plains leopard frog, so it's not continuous. And then on the southern leopard frog, it's straight down and it just ends. It is not broken. Um, so uh, that's our best bet at identifying some of these frogs, right? Because they look pretty similar. I think they sound a little bit similar, but that's the plains leopard frog and the southern leopard frog. Both you can find in our area. Here's what plains sounds like.
Plains leopard frog. Rana blairi.
So it sort of gets this, described as being like chuckling and maybe some kind of squawking in there. Um, Now, at a little bit different frequency, you're going to hear the southern also do some chuckling and some stuff that sounds like rubber balloons being twisted together. Let's listen to the southern.
Southern leopard frog, Rana sphenocephala.
Chances are a lot of you have heard those, right? Because they're pretty common. I haven't heard them this year at Sheri Capehart, but often you hear them there. Um, anyway, really cool frog. Let's talk about the pickerel frog briefly. This is a little bit to the east of us. This frog, the photo was taken. This was from the blah, let's see. Gus Engling Wildlife Management Area. Had to think about that for a sec. Gus Engling is southeast of Fort Worth, and these guys get close but not quite to Dallas County. They look like a leopard frog, don't they? But there's a whole bunch of yellow between on the legs down here. The blotches, these square. They're really kind of square or rectangular, right? The blotches are not very rounded. And look at those dorsolateral folds, man. Those guys are really pretty hefty. And in fact, these frogs are a bit more toxic than the other frogs. So that dorsolateral fold, it makes sense that they're bigger because they're fairly toxic. Again, they're not dangerous to us, but if you handle them, you really want to wash your hands before, like rubbing your eyes, for example, or something like that. Okay, here's what they sound like.
Pickerel frog, Rana palustris.
All right, and we're going to go on to the green frog. Now, you saw a photo of one of these earlier. One of the common names for this frog, and I dearly love this frog, and I love hearing them chorus. One of the common names for it is a banjo frog, and you'll see why.
Green frog, Rana clamitans.
That is just the coolest sound when you're out there and hearing these things. It sounds like a very untuned banjo being plucked. They're really very cool sounding. It's a pretty sizable frog, somewhere between a leopard frog and a bullfrog-sized frog. Speaking of bullfrogs, I've got a couple of bullfrog photos. This one is very yellow, and sometimes you see them with lots of yellow like this. And the other one will be a different color pattern, but it's the same frog. And this is one where the call is, you've people talk about jug of rum. I don't hear any jug of rum with these guys. These sound like trucks going by on the highway and the sort of Doppler effect as it zooms past us. See if you've heard any of these at ponds when you've been out.
Bullfrog, Rana catesbiana.
So that's what they sound like, and kind of a deep, sonorous kind of sound. This is one of the species where the size of the tympanum will tell you if it's male or female. If it's noticeably bigger than the eye, it's a male, like this one. Or if it's small, if it's about the same size, then it's female, like this one. Very often you see bullfrogs with this pattern that are kind of mottled looking, especially around the face, kind of green and brown mottled color. It's same frog though, they're both bullfrogs. They're so big that they can eat like baby turtles and other frogs. And yeah, there's a photo that circulates around. You may have seen one of them with a baby alligator in its mouth. That's probably not common, but basically they'll eat anything they can stick in their mouth, and they really are big frogs. So, all right, let's talk about toads for a minute here. This is the Gulf Coast toad. This one for 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 older people like me, when I was a kid, under all the street lamps, we had Woodhouse's toad. And when I was hanging out at the museum and learning about all this stuff, they would talk about how, if you're lucky, every once in a while you'll see a Gulf Coast toad because they range up kind of close to us, but not very common. Mostly we would see Woodhouse's toad. That has switched. This toad, Gulf Coast, or sometimes called coastal plain toad, is supposed to be more adaptable to variable and kind of degraded conditions. So if the water quality isn't as hot, basically the habitat is not as clean. Gulf Coast toads may do okay, where Woodhouse's toads can't keep going. So that's why apparently why we see Gulf Coast toads here and not Woodhouse close by. So this is what the Gulf Coast toad sounds like.
Coastal plain toad, Bufo nebulifer.
This is a really good example of how a lot of the toad calls are long, extended trills. So if you wanted to just kind of start, narrow down what you're hearing, one way to do that is if it's a short, repeated trill, just wort, wort, wort over and over again, chances are it may be a frog. Where if it's a long, extended trill like this long ratchet that you just heard, it's likely to be a toad. And that's what this one sounds like. I bet a lot of you heard them even in your neighborhoods, right? These guys will breed in ditches and neighborhood ponds and everything. All right, here's the Woodhouse's toad, which I miss, but I can still go up around LBJ grasslands, and you get out of town very far, and you have a chance of seeing Woodhouse's toad at night. So these are more spotted, has more of a pattern to it, I guess. And if you look at remember the cranial crests, these guys are L-shaped in the Woodhouse's toad, where they were big and sculpted in the Gulf Coast toad. These guys don't have much of, man, when it comes to an advertising call, if you really wanted to impress the ladies, I don't know if, well, I'm a speciesist, I guess, right? It's like I shouldn't just evaluate it according to human standards, but human standards would say this is less attractive than some of the others. Here's what it sounds like.
Woodhouse's toad, Bufo woodhousei.
Okay, so there's a kind of a whistling quality to it, but otherwise it sort of sounds a little bit like a sheep or something. At any rate, that's what the Woodhouse's toad sounds like. Um, and before I forget, we didn't when we were talking about skin. One of the things I don't think I mentioned is that I think all of you know is you don't get warts from them. So you can handle this toad all day long, and you won't get a wart from it at all. You might get some skin secretions, and if you rub your eyes, it'll burn, but you won't get warts. All right, now we go from the true toads to this one. This is Couch's spadefoot. People talk about them being toads. They're classification's a little different. One of the things that you can't see in this one, but that's true, is that spadefoot toads have vertically elliptical pupils. They look like cat eyes. If you notice here, these true toad eyes are oval ellipticals, right? If you look at its pupil, it's an oval. But it's longitudinal, right? It's compressed that way. But these guys have cat eyes. If it was bright daylight, you would see it look more like cat eyes. Um, couches usually has this kind of yellow and dark mottled kind of look to it. These are the ones with the extra little brown spade thing at the back of the foot that helps them dig. And here's what they sound like. Also not that attractive, but
Couch's spadefoot. Scaphiopas couchii.
so if you had to live underground to get through the drought and the heat most of the year, and you only got to dig up and come out when it rains and breed for a while in the spring, I guess you'd be grouchy too. But I mean, it almost sounds like a whoopee cushion to me. At any rate, it's a weird call, but it works. This is a different kind of spadefoot. This is herder's spadefoot. This one was seen at Gus Angling Wildlife Management Area. So the greenish color is kind of typical. Maybe not real green, but sort of green, and almost a lyre shape. If you look at the white areas down the back, it's almost a little bit of a lyre shape design, right? And here's what they sound like.
Herter's spadefoot. Scaphiopas herterii.
So that's herders. They're not very common. You're really lucky if you see one. Mainly just right after rain. If you're lucky, you'll see one after a rain. All right, let's talk about survival a little bit with these amphibians. Their survival strategies often involve high rates of reproduction, a secretive kind of lifestyle. Some species are semi-fossorial. You know, we talked about some of the salamanders are often down in burrows, under logs, down in leaf litter. Um, Another strategy is escape. They're good at leaping or hopping or swimming away from you. And then those toxic skin secretions may discourage some predators. Some of the salamanders can lose their tails. And then crypsis, just the fact that a lot of them look very um, uh, uh, camouflaged in their setting. Those help them survive. But on the question of will they survive, here's what they've got to get through. Uh, One of them is pollution. Of course, all that delicate skin and with stuff being able to cross over the skin easily, you can imagine pollution can be an issue for them. Loss of wetlands and other habitat is a big deal. We continue to lose wetlands a lot, and that's a real problem. Invasive species like predators, as well as competitors. So an invasive species might be a predator of it, but here's an example of them being competitors. Bullfrogs, you know, they've been, people have eaten the legs for a long time, right? And so they would grow up bullfrogs and keep them in captivity uh, so that they could be killed and cooked and eaten, and some of them got away. So out in the western part of the U.S., bullfrogs escaped and are where they shouldn't be, and they are competitors of the California red-legged frog, and it's one of the reasons the red-legged frog is in real trouble, is with competitors of invasive species. And yeah, you know, bullfrogs are native to us, so we don't think of them as invasive, but where they get away other places, they are invasive. Um, and then climate change is an issue that is a continuing and worsening issue for them, and that includes more droughts, more sort of unpredictable weather with flooding, drought, decreased rainfall, that kind of stuff. That's really hard on the amphibians. And then disease is a big deal for amphibians. One of them that has affected frogs is well, affects both frogs and salamanders is chytrid fungus. And there's a particular species in frogs that attacks them and another in salamanders. Um, so the Amphibian Specialist Group of IUCN reports that amphibians are significantly more threatened than are birds and mammals. So it's not just like, yeah, everything's in trouble. Well, amphibians are in more trouble than most. AmphibiaWeb, that website, shows that in roughly the last 20 years, nearly 168 species are believed to have gone extinct, and over 2,000 are declining. Malcolm McCallum, in a study in 2007, talked about this. He did some modeling studies and said if current estimates of amphibian species in imminent danger of extinction are included in these calculations, then the current amphibian extinction rate, but, let me back up. Everything occasionally undergoes extinction, right? Extinction is a natural ecological or a natural process in the wild, but it's infrequent. Not that many things go infrequent. It doesn't happen that often. But what McCallum is saying is then the current amphibian extinction rate may range from 25 to 45,000 times the background extinction rate for amphibians. So, in other words, if you look at what would you expect, what in the past might have been a normal extinction rate for amphibians, what we're seeing now is thousands of times greater than that. So, amphibians are in real trouble. So FrogWatch USA is, well, basically go to this website if you're interested in learning about the FrogWatch observation protocol. I think in some ways iNaturalist has kind of taken over some of that, but the what I'm describing here was a protocol for monitoring their calls at night and doing it in a standardized way where scientists everywhere could use your data and you can learn more about it there. One of the tools for monitoring them is this call index, where a call index of 1 is that there's a few individuals heard. A call index of 2 is calls of several individuals that overlap. And call index of 3 is that the calls are continuous, overlapping. You can't pick out individual calls. So that's one of the ways that you could, in a standardized kind of way, document your observations of frogs and toads. There's a TPWD, Parks and Wildlife, downloadable Adopt a Frog Pond packet with similar information at this URL, which I think when we get this posted, you might do it then, or you could use your phone to take a quick shot if you wanted to look at this kind of a long URL. But you can get some of that monitoring information there. And I want to mention, let me just take a quick look at, okay. I want to mention back here when we were talking about chytrid down at the bottom that the one in frogs is has spread has spread kind of worldwide, but not literally everywhere. So there are places in the U.S. that you can find that Batrachochytridium dendrobatidis. It's a difficult name, but it's the name of that fungus. And what it does when it attacks frogs is that it attacks the skin and makes it more keratinized, and the transfer of stuff across the skin doesn't work as well, screws up the electrolytes, and they wind up with heart failure. Um, it's worse in cold climates. You read about more frog extinctions, more chytrid infections in frogs in colder and maybe higher elevation climates. So we don't have a lot of chytrid, as far as I know, going on in our part of Texas. B. sal, the Batrachochytridium salamandrovirens, um, started, apparently from what I've read, started in Asia, has been spread by the pet trade, and it's one of the reasons I generally am not a big fan of the pet trade. Um, and in this case, the pet trade could be catastrophic for some species. So you get people buying them as pets and getting them shipped all over the place. So, and some of them get let loose or escape. And in Europe, that has really taken a toll on the salamanders in Europe. And herpetologists in the US are really worried about this particular chytrid getting loose in the US. It, as far as I know, has not been reported yet in the US. the eastern U.S., the Smoky Mountains, the Appalachians, all of these places in the eastern U.S. are salamander hotspots. There's just a ton of wonderful species, and if that gets started here, we're going to be in big trouble. So, um, anyway, you can read more about chytrid fungus. It is a major, major problem for amphibians. Back to these books that I recommended. There's the Frogs and Toads one with the CD in the back with the frog calls. And then the reference that I use most for salamanders in the U.S. is this one, James Petranka book on salamanders of the U.S. and Canada. Otherwise, in the field guides, you're not going to get a lot of natural history information about salamanders, but this is a really a definitive text. It's not very expensive, and it's got a ton of really great information about our salamanders. And I think I finished on time. Oh my God. Let's see if you have any questions. Let me start by having a look at chat. Hello, chat. There you are. Come on, chat. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing. There we go. And let's see what's in chat. Okay, 3 new. Oops. Oh no. What do we got here? A little metamorph on your fingertips? Holy moly. That is so cool. And I cannot tell you, Kanina, did you know what kind that is? Because that would be a tricky one to identify the frog or toad that
Yeah,
they
that
would.
one was the one of the freshly hatched Rio Grande chirping frogs because we had a few other bigger ones too around, well,
Okay,
that had
okay,
recently hatched. So it was
okay.
easier to identify those.
Wonderful. That's great. That is great. Jan's asking, frogs and toads have paired eyelids for each eye. Oh yeah, like you think about the nictitating membranes. Um, so we'll start with the pupils. The pupils in frogs and toads are mostly horizontally elliptical, and they don't get real cat-eyed. They look kind of oval, is what they look like. I can't think of any frogs and toads with round pupils. Most of them are kind of oblong like that. And you may recall that the spadefoot toads have vertically elliptical pupils. I think by paired eyelids, you mean nictitating. And right off the top of my head, oh my God, anybody got the answer to that? Because I'm blanking on that right now. That would be a cool one to look up and find out. I don't I don't recall seeing nictitating membranes, but
Okay, that's my
maybe
homework for next week
yeah,
or
exactly. A
next 2 weeks.
topic for a next presentation. I will have looked it up by then for sure. Uh, let's see, Forward Nature Center, yeah, Frog Watch USA chapter. So, and I need to talk with them about that. I knew that there was a connection there. If they do it like they used to, a Frog Watch program will have periodic training sessions where you can come in and listen to the calls like we've done tonight, but with a little bit more practice, a little bit more experience listening to calls and practice identifying them in recorded choruses, and just some other information about frogs and toads, which, yeah, maybe you'll know from tonight. But anyway, if you're interested in that one, you can go check it out. Um, and anything else? So this may have been more than you ever wanted to know about frogs, toads, and salamanders, but I hope it filled in some questions that you might have had, or maybe sparked a question or two that you hadn't thought of. Um, Next week we'll be covering crocodilians, which really just means the American alligator. That's the only one we got in this area, in Texas, and turtles, and we'll talk a bunch of turtles. So think about that. Bring your questions or bring your comments, and we will meet. This is in 2 weeks um, when we meet again. Any last questions? Okay, some of you may need to sign off or let go, but if you want to hang out and chat for a minute, you're welcome to do that.
Well, I'd just like to thank you again, Michael. These are always so informative, and you have a great way of presenting. So thanks.
Oh, well, thanks, Marion. I appreciate that. I'm glad it worked out well.
I learned a lot of cool stuff tonight.
All right, great, very good. So, Kanina, I know you are muted. So, did you already have some background in this? I'm guessing probably so.
A bit. I've lived in a few different places now, and I feel like it's
Uh-huh.
always fun to, I guess, just kind of find different things and just kind of look into what they are in the different areas you live.
Great, great. Are you a master? Are you or have you ever been a master naturalist? Or maybe think about becoming one?
Not yet, not yet.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll see you around. Thanks for being here at any rate. Anybody else have any thoughts before we go? All right, I sure do appreciate everybody being here. We'll see you next time.